Great. So it's over to Alistair to get us started. Over to Alistair Revel, Vice President for Community.
So I was about to say that there's been quite a lot of change since our community kickoff event back in September of last year. All sorts of things have actually changed, which I want to apprise you of. So it's been the big thing is that we've actually appointed as trustees Rashik Palmer as our new group CEO. We were in the sort of interregnum when we spoke last, I think. I'm really excited about Rashik's sort of appointment. Rashik used to sit on community board as the chair of FTAG. He's had a distinguished career with IBM, ending up, I think, in the C-suite. But he's not just been operative in commercial situations. He's got quite a track record in terms of delivering on more academic issues. So, for instance, he's written papers for the Harvard Business Review. So a really well-rounded CEO who's essentially sort of poacher turned gamekeeper, in the sense that he's a volunteer originally and then moved into being an employee, the number one employee of BCS. So he's seen it from both sides, which I think will shape some of his approach to the way that he takes the organization forward. So that's a really exciting situation that we're in. You may think that, change of CEO may bring about a change of strategy, but Rashik, who was part and parcel to some of the work in building up the strategy that we announced last year, is very much fully behind it. So the big themes, the strategy is not changing, but what is happening is that we're going to become a bit more focused. So he's actually looking at restructuring the organization to better support the sort of strategy execution. That's really quite important. So Rob Derry, who was the finance director, stepped up as our interim CEO, now becomes our chief operating officer, and is tasked really with putting together a platform on which to do business. And I think one can probably see that as being the beginnings of a digital transformation and becoming the sort of IT organization you'd expect the Chartered Institute for IT to be. So he's very much tasked with building our strategic capabilities to deliver on the strategy. John alluded to the fact that Holly now becomes the managing director for the Institute, and I'm sure you would all join me in congratulating her on this promotion. Essentially, I think it widens her scope from just membership to all the Institute, and I think will be a significant factor. One of the things that Rashik is clearly trying to do is increase clarity about who does what and which bits of the organisation does what. Julia Adamson, who some of you will have known as the Director for Education, particularly if you're in academia, because she supported the workings of the Academy Board and was looking at CAS and other things, takes on the title of Managing Director for Education and Public Benefit. And Lucy Island, who some of you will know, remains as the Managing Director of Learning and Development, which is the commercial arm of BCS. It's a very important aspect of our operations, because essentially Lucy makes a profit which actually gets donated essentially to the Charitable Institute. So the more money that Lucy makes, the better. And we have to remember that our subscriptions more or less allow us as the Institute just to break even. So we really need that profit. And obviously, if Lucy wasn't providing that profit, then our subscriptions would probably go up quite considerably to maintain what we're currently doing. And Carl Harris, who's been with us for a very long time, now becomes Director of Brand and making sure that we look good to the outside world. So if we go to the next slide, basically here, I just want to sort of give you a brief overview of the governance. So we've got Trustee Board, which is the top body essentially. And reporting to that, we have Academy Board, which looks after sort of accreditations, CAS, university relations, etc., and is the learned society aspect of the organisation. There's Community Board, which I'll come to a little later in a more detailed slide, but that's absorbed recently the Organisation and Employers Board, which has been dissolved. So we take over quite a lot more responsibility within the Institute. Also, a newly formed board, which is just getting underway, Influence Board. We've, as trustees and indeed as council, have just appointed the new vice president for Influence Board, who will take over in March of this year at the AGM. That takes over the dissolved Society Board and has a slightly different focus. It's more about influencing rather than just being about society. So there is some subtleties there, but that will set the outward agenda for what we're focusing on in terms of what we're trying to say and influence the wider society about. Also, Registrations and Standards Committee, really important committee. Registrations side looks at the CITP register, the Chartered IT Professional Register, and the RIT Tech register, which are our own branded registers, but it also interfaces with the Engineering Council registrations, which are Chartered Engineer, Incorporated Engineer, and IC Tech. And also sets the standards for our membership criteria, which have recently changed. So we've got membership about professionalism, essentially, for MBCS, and then moving to leadership, really, around FBCS. And I know Holly will be saying perhaps a bit more about that, and has said quite a bit in the previous kickoff event as well. And then you've got the three sort of typical governance or corporate governance committees. Risk, Audit and Finance does what it says on the can. Nominations does what it says on the can, and remuneration does what it says on the can as well. And then obviously we've got council, which is an advisory body, which is really important in helping keep trustee board going in the right direction. So moving to the next slide, I just want to remind everybody about the strategy. It's really important. We mentioned it quite extensively at the last kickoff event. Right at the top is membership. It's the first of the four components of our strategy, and is in many respects the roof on this Greek temple. It's the one thing that we must succeed at: growing and sustaining membership. That is the core and key criteria that we're pushing forwards with the strategy, but it's supported with influence, progression, and inspiration. And when I announced, or when I presented about this last time, I mentioned that there's quite a lot of symbiosis between membership and influence, membership and progression, and membership and inspiration. So the more influence we have, the more members we have, the more members we have, the more influence. And the same with progression. The better we support IT professionals in their career, the higher our membership numbers will go. The more memberships we have, the more progression we'll be able to offer. And the same, more inspiration drives people into membership, and increased voices and membership improves inspiration. So there's a lot of sort of amplifying systemic loops in this strategy, which I think is really important. But I just wanted to remind you that this is the thing that we're all meant to be aligning behind. So moving to the next slide, which is perhaps seems a little disjointed, but on the 7th of December, we welcomed our royal patron, His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent, to our Swindon office, where he was apprised of our activities. There were 3 key sessions that he sat down at in his half morning with us. This was a sort of kick-off and introduction with Mayank Prayank on the right-hand side, who is our president, and you can see Rashik Pahama just behind the laptop. He then went on to a session with Holly, Julia, John, and some of you may know Chantel Hunter from Coding Black Females, where he was told all about the exciting activities which go on within the community and within the institute. And then we've moved on to a further session talking through apprenticeships. I was extremely proud as a BCS member to see just how much stuff we are actually delivering and making IT good for society. We do a hell of a lot, and we do a lot of it very well indeed. So that was really good. Moving to the next slide and sticking with the celebrations theme, certainly chairs will have received a link to the Community Impact Report, and certainly everyone can actually navigate to it by, if you wish at the moment, sort of clicking for the QR code or searching for BCS Community Impact Report on Google. What is this Community Impact Report? Well, if you remember, we now have a community year, which starts with a kickoff and ends with the sort of community close at the end of the year. And then we are aiming to produce a Community Impact Report each year, which is a celebration of what you, as member groups, have actually managed to pull off within that year. So pre-mortem, in the sense, here we are moving forwards. What is it that we could put into the 2022-3 Community Impact Report? What is it that your groups could actually contribute to this amazing publication, which does celebrate all the things that we're doing? Certainly would encourage you to have a look at it. I would certainly encourage you when you're running events to think about sort of photography that you could take to support the fact of perhaps getting your event into this report as a way of just celebrating what we actually do. So moving on to the next slide, just a bit of a reminder of some of the key aspects and ideas within sort of community lexicon. We've got the concentric rings of engagement, which I've been talking about for 4.5 years now. The idea that it's a bit like a target, a bullseye, with BCS right at the center representing our core values, what we're about in terms of making IT good for society. The next ring out being volunteers, the 800 to 1,000 people, of which you are a representative set today. Really moving the Institute forwards. And then we've got the active members who your groups engage with and engage with the BCS in a variety of ways. Then we've got quite a big ring, perhaps not as well demonstrated in the graphic, of the passive membership, which are the people who pay their fees and don't seem to engage with us, which we really do need to try and engage with more. Then the wider IT profession, which, remember, is, to give this a sense of proportion, we think that our profession has about 2 million professionals in the UK. 1.9 of them are not in the BCS. So we really need to try and pull these IT professionals in. And then the widest circles sort of representing, sort of going out into infinity is society. We need to make sure that when you're running groups and running events, that you are aligning behind our strategy. Again, just a reference top right-hand corner there of membership, influence, progression, and inspiration, the need to align behind it. So perhaps when you're planning an event, you should be thinking, how much of this percentage is about membership? Is it 60% of this event about membership, 10% about influence? What about progression? What about inspiration? And try and push forwards on those 4 strategic themes. And then in the bottom right, the triangle, remember that we're one team, volunteers and staff working together as one community towards the bigger one BCS, which is really, really important. And I'm really pleased about how we do work well together. So moving on to the next slide, which talks a little bit about the new and existing responsibilities of Community Board. I'm not going to go into the minutiae of this slide, but you can see that basically there are 3 segments to it: community, membership, and employers. Community Board has, which was formerly called Membership Board, always has looked after member groups, which is on the left-hand side, and the rather vibrant green, shall I call it, and half of the membership. We used to focus just on individual membership, but the exciting change is that we now actually take on organizational membership from our O&E board. So we actually see the whole of membership under one roof in terms of governance, and we take on the relationship with employers, which is really, really important as well, because moving to the next slide, you can see that this allows the board potentially to capture a great degree of synergy. So you can see in the bottom, our previous oversight went only a little way along the value chain, from membership through to our direct buyers, which are individual members, but never really touched on organizational members or people employing IT professionals. Now we have that oversight as far as governance goes. And it's important because at the end of the day, we, who are the existing membership, the direct buyers, we understand, we get why membership is important, but the 1.9 million who perhaps are not members probably will become members once organizations begin saying, you know, we really want to have BCS members in our workforce. So actually working on that demand is really important. And the board now has that sufficient oversight to try and assist Holly and her team to make that actually happen. So that's a really exciting development for the Community Board team. But Community Board has changed. So on the next slide, and you'll be pleased to know that this is the final slide, you can see what Community Board actually looks like. Each of these squares at the top, the rectangles, represents a committee reporting to the board, and each one has about, I suppose, around about 10 volunteers forming each of those bodies. So you can see that actually community governance nationally is quite large. We've got Community Support Committee, which is a new committee which interfaces directly with member groups, and you'll be hearing a lot more about that from Chris Banks, who we appointed some few months ago now to form this new committee. which is a very significant move forwards, and he's got a great deal to say later on. You've got the Finance Committee run by Ram Kanandi, which your treasurers will know well. That's where the money comes from. We are running a very tight budget because we are in the middle of a cost of living crisis, and we don't have as much income as we would like, and everything is going up for everybody. Then on the right-hand side, we've got the Health and Care Executive, which is a long-established body, which provides an umbrella over the health groups and care groups, which is will interface with the relevant member groups in the member group community. And you will have some dealings from time to time with the Early Careers Executive, which advises the board on getting people at the early part of their career, not necessarily young professionals. It could be people entering the profession having had a previous career elsewhere in another sector. And then in the middle, we've got some exciting groups. FTAG, which started life under the O&E board, which is basically the Fellows Technical Advisory Group, which is actually quite a large group. It's about, I think, probably 25, 30 people, which advises the Institute on technical issues, I guess. They are selected because they are preeminent in their area. And that was led by Rishik Parmar and has already published a number of papers. And again, it's worth searching for them on the BCS website because they produce a number of really good papers. And then we have the newly created Fellowship Committee, which has one brief in terms of looking and making sure that our fellowship election process is running properly. So Registration and Standards Committee sets the standard. The Fellowship Committee makes sure that we're delivering against that standard and making sure that everyone who is of the necessary and essential or meets the standard is actually getting in properly. It's also tasked by the board with developing fellowship into something which is going to be much more collegiate, I think, in the future. So a sense of actually being a fellow is being really important, and being able to provide a platform within the Institute for providing that leadership of the community and the wider IT profession. And then in the middle is the Organisation Working Party, which is more regularly called Employers Working Party. In fact, on the slide deck that I had actually tweaked that to be Employers, but the slide deck that John's got had the slightly earlier version. This is a group led by Gillian Moore, who's a member of the Community Board, an external representative from the IT profession, and is looking at basically segmenting our organisational audience, basically. Obviously, what works for IBM doesn't work for a small organisation, vice versa. And there are many different types of organisation, just as there are many different employees. And it's important here that we actually understand what makes each of those types of organisation tick, so that we can actually provide what they need in order to start recognising the value of BCS membership. So that's really Community Board and its various organs. So it's quite a complicated piece of work in many moving parts, and it's here to basically support the member group community deliver. So I have come to an end, so I will now move, I think, to Holly, I think, John, isn't it? But I'll go for you first.
That's great. Thank you very much, Alistair. Just a reminder, all we'll be taking Q&A at the end as following all three presentations. So please feel free to use the chat. Anything pops up, we will come back to it later.